It's been 3 years since the Constitutional Court ordered that domestic workers be included in legislation which is aimed at giving them better protection in the workplace. But the domestic workers are still facing challenges. A group of domestic workers marched to the union buildings in Tshwane to hand over a memorandum of grievances. A co-founder of United Domestic Workers of South Africa, that's Pinky Mashiane, joins us now to chat more on their plight. Now, good to have you on the program, Mashiane. It's very crucial for us to really understand the basic, not just working, but living conditions of domestic workers, which also includes matters regarding remuneration or finances. Now, since this legislation was passed 3 years ago, give us a sense of the situation right now. Have matters improved?
Thank you for inviting me, and good afternoon to Newzroom Afrika viewers. It's very unfortunate that there's a very little change after 3 years of Mashiane ruling. There are many domestic workers who are injured. You remember that the Constitutional Court ruling applied retrospectively to 27 April 1994. Many employers have relocated, others have emigrated, there are those who have passed away. And according to the Labour Department, the employers are the policy holders. They are the ones who are supposed to fill the forms for domestic workers to claim from COIDA. But in a meeting that we had with senior management from the Department of Labour Compensation Fund, they said domestic workers can do affidavits. If they have proof and papers from the hospital, they can get those affidavits from police stations and submit it to the Department of Labour, and the Department of Labour will do their own investigation and see what will come out of that. But it's still a challenge. It's very, very difficult for domestic workers to claim. Even now, the number is still very low. I have 17 cases of domestic workers who are injured on duty as we speak.
Now, despite the court ruling, domestic workers are still faced with a number of challenges. I mean, struggling to receive their compensation for their work. Many are still facing not only financial challenges, but also issues around racism, abuse, assault, you name it, as well as sexual harassment by employers as well. That's concerning to hear. Can you share a bit more of examples where you can give us an indication of the conditions of domestic workers here?
That's the reason we marched to union buildings the past weekend, because domestic workers are suffering. Others is physical abuse, sexual abuse. We are saying we are there to promote Convention 190, which concerns on elimination of violence and sexual harassment at the place of work. We want to see it working for domestic workers, because we've got beautiful laws in black and white, but they do not apply to domestic workers. And the other reason domestic workers are afraid to report such cases, because they happen behind closed doors. They will be asked, where's the evidence? In our memorandum, we said it to the President that even the police, we need the police to be trained to deal with such cases, where the domestic workers will be harassed by the police, asking questions, and even telling the domestic worker that no one will believe you, who's a witness. Obviously, I'm working alone in the house. I don't have any witness. My evidence is the real one, is the only evidence that I have that this has happened to me. So the domestic workers are struggling and suffering because they work as individuals. And also because people still I always say that people still look down on domestic workers. They still don't see domestic workers as workers like all other workers in South Africa. And that's why we marched in the month of August, because we are saying domestic workers were part of 1956 march. They were domestic workers. Many the domestic workers who have careers today are there because of the domestic workers who were part of that march of women of 1956. They paved their way for them, but they have often forgotten. I also would like to raise this, that we are very unhappy when the President was speaking of all the women in South Africa, the career women, the scientists, the engineers, the soldiers, forgetting that before all those careers, there were domestic workers who were there in 1956. We're expecting him, after our march to union buildings, at least to recognize domestic workers, because if the President can recognize domestic workers, even the employers will have that thing of respecting domestic workers, because it comes from the top.
So you've been able to give us a number of cases where you've had to intervene as a union as well. But I want us to crystallize your level of intervention in some of these cases. What's the work of UDWOSA? Give us an idea of what the mandate is of your union.
UDWOSA can only represent domestic workers at the CCMA with the work-related issues. When coming to sexual harassment and abuse cases, those are cases that we take to the lawyers and they're taken to court. We have open cases with the police. We have we've taken the cases with the police, and we are following up. We support domestic workers in courts, like Mama Kaboni Namkonza was beaten by a racist son of her employer. We supported that case, though she was failed by the magistrate court in Springs, because, as I'm saying, that domestic workers are failed by system. There's a lot that still needs to change. Even the system is failing the domestic work. It was there on the national TV here on Newzroom Afrika. We saw her. She was beaten with blood over her face. But at the end of the day, the magistrate told us that she manipulated the blood that was on her face. They are not happy about it, and we are still going to talk about it, and that case is not over.
So like you say, you've been working tirelessly to advocate for the rights and fair treatment of domestic workers. You've also been pushing for more widespread registration with programs like the Unemployment Insurance Fund and the compensation for occupational injuries as well. Tell us more about that.
Yes, the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act, COIDA. Yeah, that's a case that of Maria Mashiane that was started with in Pretoria in 2012 that saw domestic workers included in COIDA. It's also unfortunate that this is the 20th year of UIF. It started on the 1st of April 2003, but many domestic workers are still not registered with the UIF. We have seen that during the time of lockdown, the most difficult time that domestic workers were faced with. Others that still have not recovered from what has happened to them during the time of lockdown. They were left high and dry, without any UIF because they were registered. They were not registered. Without any salaries, they were sent home. Others were never called back until today. So that's what is happening in the domestic work sector. That's why we said this time, let's go to the President on this Women's Month as women of South Africa who love our country and who stand up for our rights. We want him to hear it from us.
Now, you've already told us about the recent march where domestic workers handed over this memorandum to the presidency. Could you tell us a bit more about that? I mean, this march was quite significant in that it also marked the 3rd anniversary of the Constitutional Court's ruling. What's the significance beyond that?
The significance beyond the march, firstly, it was the sexual harassment case of our member by the Saudi Arabian embassy, of which it's a very bad case. And we're also sending the messages out there to all other embassies in South Africa who are doing as they please because of this diplomatic immunity, that they can do as they please with domestic workers, thinking that they will just get away. We are not going to be silenced. We will speak out for our members. We started at the Saudi Arabian embassy. From there, we went to the Union building to say to the President, this is the reason we went to Saudi Arabian embassy. Your colleagues there, or those high-profile politicians from the royal embassy of Saudi Arabia has done this to our member, and we want you as a president to intervene in this. Yes, and also assault, as I mentioned, the case of Mama Kaboni Namkonza was beaten up. We have seen a video of an elderly domestic worker being harassed and assaulted by an African-speaking male employer. That's gender-based violence, that's harassment, that's abuse. We saw it on social media, and nobody will say anything because it's a domestic worker. She's crying so loudly and so painful. It's happening. They even have the guts to take videos because there are other people in their house who are speaking. We're saying to the President that employer must be arrested, and the accomplices, those who were hearing speaking in that video, because they are family members, they're speaking the same language as the employer, maybe the wife and the children, they also have to be arrested. They must make an example. This is the 29th year of democracy. Domestic workers cannot still be living like this is still 1993, this is still 1973. There must be a change. Democracy must work for us domestic workers. Domestic workers, as I've said, that they have also put South Africa where it is. They are voters in this country. They contribute a lot to this country, even economically. Though they are sidelined, they are not part of economy. When the discussion about economy, domestic workers are not mentioned. They are put aside while they contribute in the economy of this country. We also said to the President, we want RDP houses for domestic workers. Next to the estates in Pretoria, we said next to Silver Lakes. We were promised that by the then Mayor of Tshwane in 2013, this is the 10th year, the then Mayor of Tshwane, Newzroom Afrika, who's now the Minister of Electricity, He promised us in yesterday that they were going to build houses for domestic workers. They've identified a site in Silver Lakes. We want those houses. Domestic workers are refused to be visited by families, by some employers. They have their gates locked at 8 o'clock. It's as if it's still apartheid, state of emergency. Domestic workers must be inside the premises of Silver Lakes Estates from 8 o'clock. If you are late, you'll see where you sleep. Midstream, the domestic workers are saying, and it's not only these ones. I'm mentioning this because that's where we are. Domestic workers are still treated like that. So in all provinces, we are saying the government must build domestic workers' houses. As I said, that domestic workers are voters in this country, where they will live with their children, with their husband. They are not allowed to bring their spouses where they live, while young girls, employers who are younger than domestic workers and their husbands are sleeping together every day with their children, but a domestic worker is expected to sleep alone at the back room, which is not even safe enough, while there are burglars and alarms in their houses.
Pinky Mashiane, let me thank you for your time. Of course, that's Pinky Mashiane from Udwosa, giving us some perspective of the challenges facing domestic workers and also efforts to bring meaningful change to address some of these problems.